Hello everyone, my name is Will, and today I'm going to be presenting Chainflip, which is a cross-chain native swaps AMM that we're launching very soon. Does it work? No? Okay. So, firstly, I'm going to go today I'm going to go through who we are and where we're building Chainflip out of. I'm going to present the cross-chain paradigm challenges that we're facing at the moment. And then I'm going to introduce Chainflip, the native cross-chain swap DEX that's launching very soon. And finally, after shilling my project a little bit, I'm going to tell you how does it actually benefit Polkadot. So yeah, to get right into it, we were founded in 2021 by Simon Harman, previous founder of Oxen. And we're based out of Berlin, about 30 Web3 professionals, devs, business developers, marketers, all kinds of stuff. And for the past 2.5 years, we've been building with one goal in mind, which is to displace the centralized exchange. And this is no easy task. It is a very, very challenging, situation because there's a huge amount of issues with liquidity fragmentation, with giving incentives for market makers and LPs to actually provide good liquidity on chain. And then, not to mention the infrastructure challenges underneath it. So, one thing that inspired Chainflip is in 2020, something really phenomenal happened, which was Uniswap. For the first time in history, all these decentralized assets suddenly had a place to be traded on-chain. Users were able to go onto a website and magically connect a wallet and make a swap. You didn't have to KYC, you didn't have to sign up and make an account, you didn't have to do any of that stuff, you could just go on and make a trade. It was one click from one asset to another. They had a super wide asset coverage from all kinds of crazy coins on Ethereum that you could swap from one to another. And finally, there were incentives for people to jump on and actually help with governance, provide liquidity, and create a market that they could actually participate in. This is what we call the Uniswap effect. And for the first time in DeFi's history, price discovery happened on-chain. And that's what we're trying to do, but to the broader DeFi ecosystem. So, firstly, I'm going to explain a little bit about the cross-chain paradigm. Currently, there's a lot of different ecosystems, and they all have different architecture, yet we need to find a solution where they're actually able to communicate with each other. And for this, we require cross-chain messaging. There's plenty of bridges that exist, from Axelar, Wormhole, there's all kinds of stuff, but essentially, many are bound to EVM chains, and then there's some on other chains that are non-EVM. But to actually connect the two is still very difficult. And while interoperability is on the rise, there's people like us, there's other great people developing stuff, there's still a lack of a decent user experience. It's just super tough to, as a user, jump from one ecosystem with another, and there's just no way we're going to have mass adoption if you have to go through 3 different bridges, get gas over here, bridge it there, and then go to a faucet, and then come back. It just doesn't work. And finally, there's a lot of existing DEX aggregators which are pushing forwards the need or sort of the ability to swap from one to another, but it's still a very fragmented market, and that's one of the big solutions we're trying to solve. So, if we look at the existing solutions at a very high level, there's general message passing bridges such as Layer 0 or Wormhole, as I mentioned. And there's also token transfer bridges. You can wrap assets, you can mint, burn. I know I have multi-chain up here, so it's a bit awkward. But essentially, there's a lot of different bridges working right now, but what we've found is there's a huge issue with fragmented liquidity across the board. Even when you look at something like Polkadot, when you bridge one asset to Polkadot, it's really tough because there's if you bridge it through one bridge, it's one kind of asset. If you bridge for another, it's another, and it's just impossible for a user to kind of figure that out when they're coming into a new ecosystem. So what we're really trying to solve and what we're trying to build is something that has instant guaranteed finality. It is where we swap native assets and we create a unified liquidity, aka swapping through USDC. And yeah, so moving on to the cross-chain challenges that we face at the moment is, as I mentioned before, there's a huge amount of limited interoperability. For EVM chains, there's a lot of stuff coming up. There's a lot of ZK EVM bridges. In Polkadot, you have your own bridges and sort of links to different parachains, but there's nothing really connecting everything and providing the user with an experience where they can just jump from one token to another without having to really think about it in a secure and decentralized manner. Secondly, there's a huge amount of centralization risks. When you look at a lot of the bridges and cross-chain transfers today, many call themselves decentralized. Some are not, but the bottom line is that users are still constantly getting rugged, scammed, and losing their funds on bridges that aren't actually that decentralized as they might say on Twitter. It's predominantly wrapped assets, which, as I mentioned before, creates this fragmented liquidity. There's many ways to skin a cat, but essentially at the moment, we're in a situation where all these different bridges are competing for market dominance over user assets and actually going from one chain to another. But despite what that is causing is a bunch of different solutions and different wrapped assets that aren't interchangeable. And which brings me to the next point of liquidity fragmentation. It's not just an issue for the user because it creates this scenario where, I mean, there's just no liquidity in the pools. You swap from one asset to another and you're facing like 5% slippage. But there's also the issue that market makers and liquidity providers aren't incentivized to enter a market where there's such low liquidity. There's huge amount of risks to actually enter that market. And then there's also the fact that because of this fragmented liquidity, there's actually not that much opportunity for them to make a return. So it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario where if you want to fix a problem, you have to incentivize it first, but you also have to get people to come and actually trade on it. And additionally, prices, they just don't compete with sexes right now. What I mentioned about Uniswap, where suddenly price discovery was brought on chain, it was a mix of a lot of different factors, but essentially you need to have a huge amount of liquidity and people actually using it for the price to be able to compete with centralized exchanges. And what we believe at Chainflip is that if you can't compete with centralized exchanges on price and user experience, then there's absolutely no way we're going to bring user trading on chain. And these are all their own issues, and then you add on top of that Bitcoin, which is the largest crypto asset. It's in its completely own silo, completely away from the whole broader DeFi ecosystem, yet it's the largest token we have, and that's kind of crazy, if you ask us. And then, yeah, finally, it's an extremely challenging user experience, even for me as an Ethereum user, and I'll talk about this later, when I try to go into Polkadot, it isn't easy. There's a lot of different challenges. You got to jump from one place to another, and this difficult user experience, it just isn't going to bring the large masses to any ecosystem. So, introducing Chainflip. Now is my time to chill. We are a proof-of-stake network, which we call the state chain. It is essentially an L1 built on Substrate, and it consists of 150 validators that compete in an auction-type style, which uses Frost signatures. What we've done really is we've built an L1 that sits on its own, which is essentially an accounting and settlement layer for reading messages from one chain to another. And on top of that, we've built what we call the JIT AMM, which is just-in-time AMM. It's in some ways similar to a Uniswap v3, except we took it and turned it on its head. And essentially what this has done is it means that there's no specific wallet required. You log on, you make a deposit, and you put the address that you want it to arrive at. similar to Uniswap, I guess, with a few caveats. We have a strong focus on the UI and UX. It should be easy for someone to jump from one token to another. And yeah, essentially what we've done, what this JIT allows us to do is provide the best pricing on the market for cross-chain swaps. And yeah, I should put in there, we also do native swaps. So, to get into the JIT AMM, essentially we only have one pool with USDC. There's many cross-chain AMMs or cross-chain DEXs that use their own token to swap from one to the other. We don't do that. We use USDC because we found that when you swap from, say, Bitcoin to Ethereum, that's one pool, and that's great. But then you want to swap from Bitcoin to Polkadot, and then maybe Ethereum to Polkadot. And then maybe you want to swap from Solana to whatever else, Aptos. If you have to keep creating more pools and more pools and more pools, it creates this really fragmented liquidity where you can't, like there's just too many pools, and it results in a lot of DEXs bragging about how much TVL they have. We've seen it on Twitter, we've seen it in Discord. Oh, we just reached this much TVL, but essentially the goal shouldn't be to get as much TVL as you possibly can. It should be using that liquidity as efficiently as possible to create user-friendly swaps. And so yeah, so essentially our just-in-time AMM, it works like this. When a user makes a trade, it gets sent into Chainflip, and within the Chainflip engine, we onboard market makers that are competing to make that trade. So let's say I want to swap one Ethereum to Polkadot. When I make the trade, as it's coming in, there are different market makers competing to see who can actually win the trade. And whoever provides the best pricing will get the trade and thus win the fees. This is quite different to, say, a Uniswap pool, where when you're making a trade, it goes into the pool, but essentially there's a lot of MEV front running, there's a lot of bots that come in and can actually jump in front of you in the queue and get the trade. And yeah, swaps are in essentially they're predictable, which allows the LPs to see what's coming in. They can rebalance their sheets on other exchanges due to the block confirmation times and then actually make the trade. And this is how we think that we're going to be able to compete with centralized exchanges on pricing and slippage. So, enough shilling. How does it actually benefit Polkadot? So, firstly, I want to take you through, well, I'm sure you all know it, but this is just one example. I know there's many examples, but the general user journey from going from something like Ethereum to Polkadot, or the other way around. Firstly, you have the asset. If you're going through a SEX, you're transferring it, you're swapping on the SEX, withdrawing, and going to whatever chain you want. Between all this stuff, you have a lot of friction points. Firstly, there's the KYC and actually setting up an account. I'm sure you've all had it, but when you set up an account with Binance, it takes like 2 weeks to get accepted. You can put money in, but you can't actually take it out. Things like this. The waiting time, sometimes in a bull market, it can be crazy, sometimes not. It's still this uncertainty of how do I actually withdraw my funds. There's a change of UX and UI because you're going from this sort of DeFi ecosystem, jumping onto a centralized exchange and then back to one. And finally, uncertainty of not getting rugged. Most people that have been here long enough have probably been rugged in one place or another, and centralized exchanges are one of the biggest people doing it. And then next up, we have the user journey via bridge. I know there's many different ways to jump from one ecosystem to another, so I've just chosen one. But essentially, when you're jumping from one chain to another, you're firstly bridging on something like Wormhole or something else. No hate on Wormhole. Then once you get there, you have to go and get the native asset on the other chain to actually pay for gas. Sometimes you have to go through a SEX, sometimes you have to get it through a faucet, other times there's some kind of subsidized solution, and then you can make a swap on another app, and then you actually get to where you want to go. What happens here is it's a huge friction point having to jump to another ecosystem, and then you bridge your tokens, and then you figure out, oh wow, I actually have to pay gas on that chain, and I don't have gas, or I don't have that specific token, so I need 0.1 of this to do it. As a user, I was doing it the other day, and I was like, wow, like this sucks. I don't want to do this. And there's just no way we're going to get this huge influx of people when it's a real headache to jump from one chain to another. It should be as easy as jumping from one app to another on your iPhone. And now I get back to Chainflip. What we're doing here is, and I'll show it later, a little bit of alpha. I've got our beta version up that we're launching very soon. But essentially, what happens now is when you're coming from the Ethereum ecosystem, you jump from Ethereum, you put a deposit, and you put the deposit address that you want it to go to in one single swap, and then it goes to where you want. It's a reduced friction points because we have one pool per token, which actually, as I mentioned before, limits the fragmented liquidity, which actually creates swaps that are affordable, that have no slippage. We believe we can get price slippage down to less than 0.5%, which is highly competing with centralized exchanges. When you compare it with the current Bitcoin swaps of today, you're talking 3–5%. And essentially, what happens here is, for the user, it is literally just jumping. I have this Ethereum, and I want DOT. I have two wallets, one to the other, and that's it. There's no ifs and buts, no complications, and it's all done through a trustless and decentralized protocol. And now we get to how it's going to look. So essentially, when you come onto the Chainflip website, you'll put in your however much ETH you want to swap and whatever token DOT that you want to swap. It'll give you an approximate price, which is based on an index price. It'll give you over here, we have the route. So it'll show you the route that it takes. This swap would be going from Ethereum to USDC to Polkadot, and it'll be going through Chainflip. In the future, we're looking to work with different aggregators and other protocols, so potentially there's tokens that we don't support currently, but that we could support in the future, and then the route here would show that it goes through them, or if it's another token, that it would go there. It shows you the estimated total fees, the estimated rate, and then the estimated price delta, aka the slippage. And yeah, lastly, when you go for the destination address, it shows you an address to put in, and that is then the address that you go to. This essentially means that for a user, you don't have to bridge anymore. You don't have to jump onto like different sites, or you don't have to like get gas on another chain. All you have to do is put how much you want to swap, where you want it to go, and voila. And then it also shows the estimated time. And yeah, essentially what we believe to be true is that what we're fixing is, firstly, it has to be simple and intuitive. The current UX is not simple and intuitive. We hope that ours is. We want it to be a one-stop solution. You shouldn't have to go to different websites to swap assets. It just doesn't make sense. It should be transparent. You should know the exact prices that you're going to get. You should know where your assets are. So when I'm bridging sometimes, I don't know where my assets are. That's crazy. That shouldn't be the case. And so that's something we're working hard on. It should be secure. We work very hard to show in our documentation about how we're set up. It should be credibly decentralized. It should run on a validator network that has enough validators that are decentralized. And you should only pay gas once. You shouldn't have to pay gas on one chain then another. And then finally, you shouldn't have a headache when swapping from one asset to another. It should be fun, easy, intuitive. So how do we get there? Essentially, what we can do really well is swap from something like Ethereum to Polkadot or Bitcoin to Polkadot. We can do that really well, and we can do it with really low slippage. But we can't service all the parachains in Polkadot. It just doesn't make sense for the way we work. We also can't service all the different tokens in Ethereum, or we can't go and work with every single coin or blockchain out there. Due to the way our AMM works, we work really well on the pairs that we can service. And this means that we need to integrate with partners. We want to work with, if you're a parachain, if you're a DEX, perhaps you're an aggregator, a wallet, or any kind of swapping protocol that's interested in cross-chain capabilities or interoperability, we want to work with you because we can do part of the swap, but we need the final destination and we need help getting there. And we can help you on getting users from whether it's Ethereum, Solana, Bitcoin, or wherever it might be onto your DEX, parachain, or whatever it may be. So yeah, if anybody wants to talk integrations, come chat with me. And yeah, that is my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and yeah.
Are there any questions? Anybody?
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you explain again the part where you say you can't get MEV, let's say, sandwiched thanks to your system?
Certainly. Okay, so traditionally what happens when you get MEV sandwiched, and I know there's a few ways to do it, but essentially when a user makes a trade, there's people that can see that trade coming in, and they will pay excess gas fees in order to front run that trade and get in front. The way that we work is when a user makes a trade, it comes into the Chainflip engine, but we don't have a liquidity pool where it just like the price is constantly changing. Rather, the way it works is that we have market makers onboarded to the platform, and they compete to make a trade. So if you as a user swap from, let's say, Ethereum to DOT, when you make your swap, market makers will see that this swap is coming in, and they will have a small amount of time due to the block confirmations to react, and then they'll be competing with each other in order to provide the best possible pricing on that swap. And their incentive is that there's some underlying assumptions here, which is that one, market makers are able to rebalance their books on other exchanges, which they are. Additionally, we need more than one market maker because they have to actually be competing for the swap. If it was just one market maker and you have a swap, they would give you a crazy price, probably. But luckily, we have more than one, so that's all right. And so essentially, when you're making a swap, they're competing to see, all right, well, how low can I go in price in order to still win that trade, while at the same time be profitable and earn on either the fees or on some kind of arbitrage opportunity. But what we've seen is, if you look at basically Uniswap v3 right now, there's a lot of retail that are just putting LP positions into the pool, but the professional market makers are not. They're actively managing their positions, and this is essentially what we're doing on our DEX, except due to the fact that we're being very open and honest and transparent about the fact that they're competing with each other, it drives the price down, and you can't really be front run. Rather, it's the market makers trying to front run each other in order to win the trade. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, makes sense.
So does this mean that the price that the user see in the UI is already the sum of the live offers of the market makers, or the user can set his minimum price and then maybe the swap doesn't happen because no market makers are going to provide the liquidity?
Yeah, so the price here is an estimated price based on live information that we get. It is not the final price. I can go back to that slide real quick. No, I can't. But essentially, oh, yes, I can. It's all right, I'll just explain it. Essentially, that price that's given is a price index based on what the predictable price is. And when at the end of your trade, you'll get what the exact price was. We're lucky in the sense that we have considerably less slippage than other cross-chain bridges in the spaces that we operate. So the slippage is still considerably lower, but it is an estimate. We have some solutions for the future, but at the moment it is still a complete estimate based on the current pricing and then what market it is and how much you're swapping. But that's very similar to, say, Uniswap, where you can set your limits, but still there's some level of well, unpredictability in what the final price will be. Yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned that there are no wrapped assets on, or no wrapped assets are used in Chainflip. How are my deposits secured? So if I'm depositing into Chainflip, how is it secured? Is it some multisig, or is it dependent on some relayer network, or how's that work?
Yeah, so essentially it works, well, a few different ways, but it's similar to multisig, but essentially we run a validator network where users are able to spin up a validator node and stake their flip. These validators then work on a threshold signature schemes, and they compete over the top 150 validators will win an auction, and obviously the block rewards that come with that. So people are incentivized to run a validator node and stake their flip in order to earn rewards. In return for earning those rewards, validators are expected to pass transactions coming in and also transactions coming out. And we have vaults on either side of different chains. So for something like DOT and ETH, we would have a vault on Ethereum and a vault on Polkadot. And then the validators will be reading all of the messages coming in from each chain. And let's say you're making a swap, they would read that swap coming in. It would have to be passed through the validator network. They would see it coming in, and then on the other side, they would pass the message on and pass the egress transaction out. This works under the assumption that we have a higher value staked in Flip than we actually do in TVL, because we're total value locked. Obviously, there's an incentive for users to lock up their Flip to earn rewards, but at the same time, when you're making these swaps, if there's a bunch of liquidity on the platform and not very much Flip staked, then you'd have the issue of, well, there wouldn't be economic security. So what we're working hard to do is to create an incentive design where people actually want to stake their Flip, where it makes economic sense to stake their Flip, and thus create an economic security model around our validators. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. In the preview of the beta UX, you showed a route preview, how the token will traverse, but how will you do that if it's an JIT AMM and market makers are competing?
Yeah, so essentially, you as a user don't interact directly with the market maker, you interact with the Chainflip engine. So when you make a trade, it goes in, but on the other side, there's people competing to make that, like finalize that trade and actually make it for you. You're not direct. It's not like a directly peer-to-peer swapping where you're like literally working with the market maker. So the route is still through the Chainflip engine. The question is just, where do we source that liquidity? It could be one market maker, it could be multiple, it could even be a retail LP, it could be anyone really. But the point is that we show the route that it goes through from our side and from the user's side. Where we source the liquidity depends on who's able to offer the best pricing. The real thing about this was, as we look to aggregate different chains, to work with other cross-chain providers, there may at times be a solution where it takes you through a different protocol to get to your end destination, and it would be reflected here. So let's say we take you from ETH to DOT, and then you want to go to Moonbeam or something. Then that final destination would be whoever we work with to get you there. and that would be reflected in the route. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you very much, if there's nothing else.